All right, this is the Health is Wealth podcast, and today I am joined by the lovely Dr. Belisa Vranich. How you doing?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing fantastic. All right, let's get rolling. So I already started reading your book, and I actually wanted to start by sharing a quote from your book that I think will kind of gear us through the rest of our conversation today, and it's, "The best way to take care of yourself is to deal with the most important thing first, your breathing. Everything else is secondary." And I was actually drawn to your TED Talk from a friend of mine who knows I'm a huge nerd when it comes to health. He said, you got to take a look at this in TED Talk. And especially being a chiropractor myself, we deal with a lot of people who have breathing issues, but that's not really our specialty or focus. So I was just totally drawn to your TED Talk. But more importantly, first off, I'd love to hear a little bit more about who you are as a person and a little bit more about your story.
Sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been a clinical psychologist for about 25 years. I did my undergrad in North Carolina. I'm a Tar Heel. And then did my grad work in New York City. I've worked in sort of every aspect of psychology possible. I've been the health and sex editor at Men's Fitness magazine. I've worked with violent ex-cons. I've done a lot of IQ testing in public schools. So you name it within the umbrella of psychology, I've pretty much done it. The interest in breathing came from my own stress. And having to address my own stress. I found that, and if you watch the TED Talk, I talk about it a little bit, is that I was grinding my teeth and sort of being myself your quintessential type A New Yorker, sort of thriving on stress, glorifying it, I'm embarrassed to say. I did hit that wall, and Arianna Huffington talks a lot about hitting that wall when all of a sudden something breaks. So you either make a mistake that has a lot of repercussions, or a small injury turns into a big injury, or you're distracted and that has a bad repercussion, or you forget something. So all of a sudden you come to the conclusion that you are not controlling your stress. And it's a real slap when you thrive on stress and you think, wow, I'm really good at this. And then all of a sudden you realize that you don't, and you hit that wall. It's a real come to Jesus moment. So I came to Jesus. I had that moment, and I realized I had to do something about my stress, and that some of it is good. Stress when it inspires you and it motivates you is good. Stress when it hurts you and makes you fearful is not. So long story short, I had to go to the dentist and deal with my teeth grinding, and I'm sure you deal with a lot of teeth grinding in your patients. And I went to yoga class. So a lot of people just default when they talk about stress, they default into, I guess I should take a yoga class. And that's exactly what I did. I found one that played amazing music because I didn't love the too esoteric stuff. I wanted a class that played Beastie Boys and Zeppelin, and I found
Nice.
one. It was a great, great class. But we would do breathing exercises at the beginning of class, and I just loved them. They had these sultry words like Kapalabhati and Ujjayi, and we would breathe through one nostril and the other, and it was really amazing. So I went and I looked for more breathing exercises. And being kind of a science nerd myself, and definitely someone who needs to do diligence and like science behind everything, I wanted classes where, there was a baseline of what good breathing is, and there was exercises, and there were studies, which was a little hard to find in the beginning. I wasn't quite looking in the right places, but I did take some really interesting classes with gong baths and chakra balancing and out in teepees and Joshua tree. So I kind of went and experienced every type of breathing class I could, and then looked to sports for breathing and interesting breathing exercises. So that's a very long answer to your question as to how I got here. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. And, I think right now we're dealing with such an incredible epidemic in poor breathers. What do you see as really kind of that big cause behind this epidemic of poor breathing?
Well, I hate to say stress because everybody sort of tunes out when they hear the word stress because they've been hearing it for so long. But the fact is our stress now is different. We don't ever turn off. So whereas before you had just moments, and I mean, seriously, just like a couple seconds where you would just take a deep breath and there would be nothing and you could just let yourself relax for a second. We don't have that anymore. When we have a couple seconds of, take a deep breath, we don't do it. We look at our texts. Or there's so much media and things going on around us that we just focus on something else. So we're not getting those kind of little moments of being able to calm down throughout the day. And our body is not set up. It's really not designed to be at a high stress level for this many hours in a row, for that many days in a row. So when you're stressed out like that, one of the things you do is that you either hold your breath or you grip your body and you brace it and you don't take deep breaths. And that's what everybody's doing. When you read the literature about dysfunctional breathing patterns, it talks a lot about overbreathing. And the fact that it's a whole new day. A lot of people overbreathe, but the majority of people I've been seeing in the last 10 years either just hover, hold their breath, they aren't breathing at all, or if they are, they're just taking these tiny little hamster breaths.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that with everybody, even just like walking down the street, or you see somebody talking on the phone, you just see very shallow breathing, and then all of a sudden it's just this big. It's like, is that the first breath you've taken all day?
All day, even all week. Yeah.
Yeah. And how, I thought this was really interesting. How does bad breathing affect our health?
Everything. It's the cornerstone to your health. So there's immediate effects, and then there's sort of long-term effects. So immediate things are your acidity changes. So if you're not breathing well, your acidity is going to be off. So most people think, oh, my acidity's off, I have to eat more greens, I have to drink alkaline water. And the fact is that you have metabolic acidosis and you have respiratory acidosis. So I see folks, and I'm sure you do too, that come in and they just eat so clean. They have just impeccable diets, but they're acidic. And if you change their breathing, their acidity actually gets normal. It gets normalized. And it's fascinating to see. I actually had someone just yesterday who came in and she eats really well, but she was acidic. She was a little bit under a 6. And you should be, as you know, between 6.5 and 7. Optimal is between 7.2 and 7.4. So she was under a 6, which is not good. If your body's acidic for, a span of time, you're going to have inflammation, you're going to have autoimmune disorders, all sorts of things are going to come crashing in. She changed her breathing. I saw her yesterday and it had been a week and she was at 6.8. And I actually was so surprised because I don't usually see that big of a jump that I took her acidity twice because I was really amazed at, wow, she went from under 6 to 6.8. So acidity is one thing. Pain disorders, you're going to feel much more pain when something hurts if you're not breathing right. And it just ripples throughout your whole body. Your sense of stress and your sense of well-being is one thing that's affected immediately because if you're breathing in fight and flight, well, you're just going to be tense and unhappy about it. So if you change your breathing and your nervous system hears that you can calm down, you immediately feel a lot of relief.
And you talk a lot about oxygen being that cellular fuel. So, I mean, as soon as you kind of think about that, like oxygen is this fuel for your cell, for your mitochondria as well. I mean, imagine what that does to your brain function, to your performance, all these other things. And what's the one thing, you talk a lot about that in your book, what's the one thing you do the most during your day is breathing. So if you can change that one thing, imagine the impact that's going to have on the rest of your life.
Huge. And your brain, like you just said, is that your brain is the organ that uses the most oxygen in your body. So if you're not breathing well, the first organ that's going to start feeling it is your brain. And we're wondering, oh, my memory's not good. Oh, I think I'm good at multitasking, but I'm not. I'm trying to think out of the box. I'm trying to calm my brain at night. Well, it's just not listening to you because it's, starved for oxygen, or more precisely, it's starved for a balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Yeah, I feel like that could be a huge hack for like brain fog. You're sitting there, it's that 1 o'clock lull, and people start to feel that little drag. I mean, something as simple as taking 5 minutes just to focus on your breathing can immediately light you right back up.
Yeah, 2. Just like it's that espresso without the caffeine. It's that little boost of sugar without the sugar. Just give your body some oxygen and it's going to respond well.
And let's talk a little bit about your book, Breathe. This is actually not your first book. You actually have a bunch of different books.
I have a few different ones, yeah.
Just a few. So let's talk a little bit about Breathe. What was kind of the inspiration behind that? You talked a little bit about that, but it's a 14-day.
No pun intended, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what happened was I started teaching, and I talk a lot and I talk fast, and I always believe that you should have a dynamic session with your patients where they feel leaving empowered and they have a lot of tools. So like most things I do, I kind of went, to that extreme, and I'd have people leave my workshops. So they're 3-hour workshops, and you're just pummeled with information. But they would say, like, I wish I had a workbook. I wish I had written more notes. I really I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed with information. So I wrote the book and I started piecing together the book to be able to give people something to take with them. And then, of course, if someone can't see me, they should be able to learn how to breathe as well. So if it's the matter of buying a book or sharing a book or taking it out of the library, I don't care as long as the information is out there. And don't tell my publisher I said that, but so that folks could get that information on how to breathe and just change it themselves at home.
Awesome, awesome. And talk about the different types of breathing. There's the vertical breathing, the horizontal versus the mix. Talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, sure. So most people breathe vertically, and you can try this. I'm sure after you've read the book, you should not be breathing this way, but most people breathe this way. And just everyone can just take a deep breath right now. Take a deep breath, you fill all the way up, and then you exhale and you let it go. Deep breath in, you fill all the way up, and then you exhale, let it go. So if you feel yourself get a little bit taller on the inhale and exhale and kind of settle down, then you're a vertical breather. And it makes sense. It's a term I made up where you go up on the inhale and down on the exhale. It's subtle, but you still feel a stretching upward. So that's a vertical breather. 9 out of 10 adults breathe this way. It's a very, very common way to breathe. Unfortunately, it's completely anatomically incongruous, meaning that you're not breathing with the muscles that you should be, affecting the organs that you should be. It's a completely just bizarre way to breathe, especially if you look at the rest of the planet and the rest of the animals on the planet. So if you look at, do you have any pets?
No.
No?
No, grew up with dogs,
cat,
though.
Fish? Yeah?
Grew up with dogs.
Grew up with dogs. Okay, so, just think about any pet you have, and it can be really any pet. You have a goldfish, that's perfectly fine. Look at your dog, your cat. Every animal on the planet breathes where the biggest part of its lungs are. That's where it expands. So in most animals, it's going to be the middle of their bodies. Expands where the densest, most oxygen-rich part are the lungs are. We are the only ones that have taken that and completely made it dysfunctional, and we're breathing where the smallest part of our lungs are. So if you're going to breathe with the biggest part of your lungs, you can take your hands and put them down, and you can do this too. Of course, you know where this is, but it's at the bottom of your ribs. So if you put your hands sort of between your belly button and your pecs, that's where the biggest part of your lungs is. However, when you breathe vertically, you're not really using all that well. You're using more of the top of your lungs, which is not as dense, not as oxygen rich, and just not the most efficient breath you can take. So a horizontal breath is what you want to take, which is through the middle of your body. Now, most people gasp and go, oh my gosh, you mean I'm going to make the middle of my body wider? Why would I want to do that? So we're very vain and it hurts us. But when you take a breath in the middle part of your body, and it starts with the belly breath. I don't say that belly breaths are the solution. They're a step in a better breath. But if you let your middle expand on the inhale and don't use your shoulders, you start at least breathing in the way that you should be. And the exhale is actually a squeezed and narrowing of your body. So one of the wonderful things that happens is that although you do look a little heavier for a split second, is that when you exhale, you actually are working your core and all the inside muscles that have to do with your core and your middle and your abs and your pelvic floor. So all kinds of wonderful things. So the short answer then is really to breathe in a horizontal way where your whole middle of your body expands on the inhale and then narrows on the exhale.
And you go through a ton of different exercises in the book on how to train that. What's one of the most prominent ones that people can take just from this talk now? What's one of those key exercises people can do just at home just to start training that properly?
It's called rock and roll. It's you lean forward and you actually let your belly go. And like I said, later on, you'll be able to get a 360-degree breath in the lower part of your body and not look like Santa Claus. But for now, you're just going to let your belly go. So if you rock forward in your chair, just rock forward, let your belly go, take a big inhale, feel your whole body expand. You can even take your elbows and let them fly out a little bit just to get the sensation of inhaling and getting bigger. And then exhale, you tip back. Your back goes towards the back of your seat and you squeeze. And you think of your belly button going closer to your spine, your whole body sort of wringing out on the exhale. And it makes sense. Of course, you're going to fill up and empty in the middle of your body because that's where the biggest part of your lungs are. And it's also where the biggest breathing muscle, the most dynamic, most important breathing muscle is, which is your diaphragm.
Yeah, and it's very different. We've been so trained to breathe a certain way, especially with all the stress in our life, that the first time I tried doing those and I'm sitting there, it takes a lot of concentration at first
Yeah.
to really do it. And you don't
Yeah.
realize, how difficult that is. But then afterwards, you feel so much
Much
better.
better. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And you even have like, I think 10 or 12 different exercises for
Yes.
different categories. I mean, the book has so many resources in it. It's
Oh,
ridiculous.
thank you.
But
Yeah.
it's a really phenomenal resource. Now, so for some of those who are, say, just starting to get into this, they just realize that they have some breathing difficulties, aren't able to breathe properly. Would the first step be a rock and roll, or do they need to start somewhere even before that?
You know what? If you do rock and roll and it completely baffles you, and this does happen with some people where it feels so incredibly bizarre, they can't even get it right. And again, it's not your fault. It's because of decades of bad habits that have been reinforced by our culture. I say lie down on the floor and do what's called diaphragm extensions. So you put something on your belly that has a little bit of weight, and that can be anything from a plate, like a gym plate, 5 pounds, or it can be a bag of rice. Really, don't go out and run and buy anything in particular. I use books. Just put them on your belly, and on the inhale, you're going to press that weight upwards. So it's actually you're extending your diaphragm. Inhale, push it away, and exhale, let it fall. So the belly breath, the middle of the body breath, feels more natural when you're lying down. And in fact, even if you breathe vertically during the day, you probably change to be more of a horizontal breather at night when you're lying down. So take that idea, eyes open, awake, and see about if it feels a little bit more natural, inhaling, pushing whatever it is you're using away, and then exhaling and letting it fall. Then sit back up again and see if you can do that same movement.
That's awesome. And are there different types of breathing for, let's say, to energize the body or versus to go to sleep?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, and you shouldn't use one in the place of the other. If I know I've had folks that have done the energizing breathing at night and then said, I can't go to sleep, or doing the calming breathing when you want to wake up, and it's just going to mellow you out even more. So the energizing breathing is one, and I'm sure you know this, but the breathing techniques that are in this book and that I teach come from a whole bunch of different places, not just yoga. Yoga was the start, but actually then I went into free diving, birthing, singing, belly dancing, martial arts. So it comes from all these different places. So it's not all yoga for sure. The breath that is for waking up does come from yoga, and it is a short, sharp exhale, as if you're blowing out candles. So it's the. However, you have to make sure that your belly is squeezing with every blow of a candle. So you have to put your hand on your belly, and you can try this now if you want, is that you pretend you're blowing out candles, but you have to make sure it's synchronized with your belly. Now, if you're blowing out, if you're exhaling, your belly's going to narrow every time you blow out. And think about you may do 10 of these and then go, woo, this is a lot for me. You may do 20, you may do 30. Because I like numbers and I like having a baseline. There's actually competitions with people that I teach around the United States with who has done the most. So usually with the exhale pulsations, these candle blows, 50 is the average. And a lot of people get really down on themselves because they can do 20 or 30, but that's okay. You can do 20 or 30, just work on getting to 50. 120 is the average for athletes. And the record just got broken by a UFC fighter that I work with at 780. So it's good to be competitive about this and give yourself a baseline, because although you can't see your lungs and you can't see air, you can definitely get a baseline on your breathing and then work up from there.
Wow, the challenge has been thrown out there. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, here's a little fun one. So in the book, you talk a little bit about this, but let's imagine Joe. Joe lives up a couple flight of stairs. He's walking up the stairs. He gets to the third staircase, and he goes, "Oh man, I really need to work on my cardio." Why is cardio not always the key for that?
You know what? That's so interesting, because most people, when they're trying to get their conditioning and their endurance better, they think cardio. And cardio is what? Your heart. but actually your breathing is about getting more oxygen through your body, which, is due to your heart. But what about getting a better breath, a more efficient breath? And what about your breathing muscles? So breathing muscles are sort of a secret in the sports. If you're not working out your breathing muscles, then there's a whole, topic that you have completely set aside that you could be really good at, that could be helping your game in a lot of ways. So, yes, cardio is really good for you. Having a strong heart is important. But if you're not breathing, using your breathing muscles and working them out separately, I don't mean when you're doing your sport, I mean doing those exhale pulsations and other exercises, they're just going to be weak. So how good could you actually be if your breathing muscles were strong? So Joe should probably look and see what's happening with him, because he's probably breathing with a vertical breath, which is a small breath. It's an inefficient breath. It actually takes up a lot of energy if you're breathing with your shoulders, because your shoulders were never meant to be primary breathing muscles. Your primary breathing muscle is supposed to be your diaphragm. Most people's diaphragms are so locked up, and I'm sure you see this all the time, where you say, you try to get them to take a belly breath or try to get them to take a deep breath, and their diaphragms are just literally locked up. So learning to take that lower body breath, and the theory is that one breath on the bottom counts for 6 on top. And I think that, for some people it's less, it's 5. For some people it might be a little bit more, but that lower body breath is going to be a better breath, and it's going to take up less energy to take that breath.
So say like per minute, what's a good range of breaths? I guess you could say, if that's a correct question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So most people breathe between 10 and 15 breaths a minute. But actually, the best breath you can take, and it's called a coherent breath. Dr. Richard Brown talks a lot about this, is 6 breaths a minute. And 6 breaths a minute, which feels really slow, is the best breathing you could take for your heart. If you can get your heart rate to 60 and your breaths to 6 breaths a minute, that's actually where you get the best heart rate variability. Yeah.
And that's a huge area that's like really blown up right now, is heart rate variability and just how the balance of the nervous system plays into overall health. And I think, especially with our patients, we take heart rate variability in our office. I mean, there's a huge difference in terms of their breath. I've even tried that with myself after a stressful day. I take my heart rate variability after work, and it's just through the roof. And then I just spend some time breathing, and it's amazing to watch it shift, like right there and then. It's incredible.
Blood pressure, too. I mean, blood pressure responds to your breathing. And that's actually one of the places where I found a lot of science, which is perplexing, because you'd think that if breathing can fix your blood pressure immediately and there's science behind it, why, when someone has high blood pressure, are they not getting breathing exercises and maybe a little bit of medication? Immediately they get medication and no breathing exercises. So kind of interesting.
Very, very much so. Now talk a little bit about the pelvic floor. This was an interesting one I found in your book, especially when it comes into, let's say, weightlifters or CrossFitters. Can you talk about a little bit of the importance of the pelvic floor?
Oh, absolutely. So the pelvic floor is your diaphragm's best friend, pretty much. So if you think of your body like a poster tube, right? Or, I remember when we used to have these Tootsie Roll banks, and they were long, and you put money in the top. And they have two places where you could open up. So one was obviously the top, and then there was the middle, and then there was the bottom. So your diaphragm is in the middle of your body. It would be on the top here. And your pelvic floor is on the bottom. And they actually are connected. So usually when I talk about pelvic floor, people go, we're breathing. Why are we talking about pelvic floor? But the fact is that they're connected by the psoas muscle. And if your pelvic floor is engaged and working when you're breathing, you actually get to take a whole body breath, because breathing happens pretty much from your armpits down to your pelvis when you're taking a good breath. So on the inhale, and you can do this when you're taking rock and roll, on the inhale, when you rock forwards, you should actually relax your pelvic floor. Now, a lot of people will go, pelvic floor, yes, and then you ask them what it is and they don't know. Or you say, how many muscles in your pelvic floor? And they say 1. And actually it's more than 1. it's 20. Some actually, when I used to teach this a long time ago, the men in the audience would go, "Oh no, I don't have one of those." So yes, you do. It's 20 muscles if you count the ones from the small pelvic floor and the ones that attach. So 20 muscles that go all around your hips and all around the bottom of your body, the bicycle seat. And when you inhale, they should relax so that you can take a bigger inhale, so everything moves downward. And then on the exhale, your pelvic floor, you can actually squeeze it, do a little Kegel, and have it come away from the bottom of your chair. So when you're breathing well, your pelvic floor is moving along with you. When you do rock and roll, you don't really have to think about it, but your pelvic floor is being engaged a little bit as long as you let it. So there is something called a reverse Kegel. And a pelvic floor physical therapist I like very much named Isa Herrera talks about reverse Kegel. And it doesn't mean bear down. God knows we do not want to bear down on our pelvic floors, but you do want to be able to relax it, because a lot of pelvic floor pain and dysfunction isn't because your pelvic floor is weak, it's because it's out of balance and parts of it are very tight. So Kegels are great, but if you have pelvic floor problems, to be just squeezing and squeezing and squeezing and squeezing and making something that's might be already too tight even more tight could lead to more pain and more dysfunction. Now, CrossFitters and heavy weightlifters have some of the worst pelvic floors out there. Who do you think has some of the best pelvic floors, by the way? What's your idea? What's your thought?
People who do yoga.
Yeah, possible. Yeah, actually, that's a good one. But horseback riders as well.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, horseback riders.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So with weightlifters, what happens is that, and you get something called, I think it's pink sock, when your pelvic floor falls out of your body. Do not Google this at home. I mean, at work, Google it at home, because it is not a pretty picture. But if you lift heavy weights or if you do CrossFit, you need to know about this, because if you're starting to pee when you lift, it does not mean that you have a good workout. I mean, it might mean that, but what it really means is you're herniating your pelvic floor. And if you're herniating your pelvic floor at any age, it's really a slippery slope to pelvic floor prolapse later on in life, and no one looks good in adult diapers or needs to be in them. So that's where pelvic floor kind of comes in.
Wow. Yeah, and gosh, I definitely am not going to go look that up. No way. Now, what's the difference between mouth versus nose breathers? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And again, I love referencing people because I'm a psychologist, I'm a breathing expert, but there's a lot of amazing people out there that have been addressing breathing for a long time. Paul Chek does a great video on YouTube on mouth versus nose breathing. I think it's 4 hours long. He really gets into a lot of details, but so I would encourage you to go and look at that. But the fact is that a lot of us breathe through our mouths, and it has to do with having deviated septums, having problems with our sinuses, or talking a lot. So people that talk for a living don't use their nose to breathe. So when I have folks that are for instance, I have a good friend named Joey Diaz, who is a comedian, and Joey talks for a living. So getting him to breathe through his nose is really hard because he talks for a living. He talks a lot anyway. He has a podcast. When he's not doing those things, he's on the phone. So I have to get him to kind of close his mouth and breathe through his nose sometimes. And it's not just, I mean, before I started studying this, I thought, well, those little hairs, like really, how important can they be in the front of your nose? So it's not really the little hairs in your nose. It's you have these passageways deep inside that clean things out before they get to your lungs. And God knows that our air is so polluted that we really, really need to be shifting to our nose, because just the schmutz that's out there, to use one of my favorite New York words. And if you're breathing through your mouth, whatever is in the air happens to be in the air that moment is going straight into your lungs. So people that breathe through their mouths get much more respiratory infections than anyone else, because there's nothing that's cleaning out the air to get down in there. The other thing that's actually really interesting to me is that when you breathe through your nose, you get nitric oxide, of course, which calms you down. You don't get that any other way. And it cools your brain. So there actually is science that looks at alternate nostril breathing in yoga and how breathing through your nose cools the bottom of your brain, which, you know, if you're hot-headed, is a good thing.
So for someone who say they found out that, I talk for a living, I'm a mouth breather, what should I be focusing on or what can I do to help that?
You need to probably pause and close your mouth, put your lips together, and breathe in and out through your nose. Now, many of us will switch to breathing through our mouths because it's more effort through your nose. It's a smaller orifice, so it's just more effortful. And I mean, human beings in general are terrifically lazy beings. And if there's a shortcut or a hack or something we can do to just make life easier, we do it, even if it's bad for us. So closing your mouth and breathing through your nose, even though it feels like, I feel like I need to take a bigger breath to get the air that I need. Well, focus on taking that bigger breath. Work on those breathing muscles. If you have sinus problems, start to address them. You probably have some kind of allergy. You have some kind of inflammation. You need to start, figuring out what's going on with your sinuses. If you have a deviated septum, try to figure that out as well. Nasal irrigation, the neti pot is an awesome thing to start with. And just taking a moment to put your lips together and breathe in and out through your nose, especially at night. If whoever's sleeping next to you tells you that you snore and you breathe through your mouth all night long, it's time to get a piece of tape or a Band-Aid and just tape things up, or look at a CPAP machine, depending on how bad things are, and breathe through your nose. Yeah.
I would love, and just off the top of your head here, can you give us a little bit of a story? Because you have a bunch of stories that you share in your book as well. I'd love to hear a little bit of a case study for people who maybe are a little skeptical on the power of breathing,
Sure.
just to hear something like what actually happens when you change your breathing.
So, I mean, I think the acidity is really important. So talking about how you can be doing all these things, but if you're acidic, you are going to get sick if you're not sick already. I think that for me, stories that have to do with back pain that resolved and with digestive issues that resolved are particularly fascinating because I didn't expect them. I went into this looking as a psychologist at how am I going to help my patients and myself with anxiety and stress. But I had to learn a lot of anatomy and realizing that the diaphragm is actually a secondary esophagus and that breathing through the middle of your body and using your diaphragm to breathe can actually help with acid reflux, with constipation, with GERD, with irritable bowel. That to me was mind-blowing. So I think that, I had one particular case recently that came in with terrible acid reflux. And anybody who has acid reflux is a vertical breather. I mean, you can just go ahead and assume that, because if you're using your shoulders to breathe, you're not using your diaphragm. And your diaphragm is a secondary esophagus and works to keep everything down and keep everything in your digestive system massaged. Well, you're going to have problems. So a lot of the illnesses that we're seeing right now have to do with illnesses of consumption, have to do with illnesses of what I call too fast. And if you slow down and breathe, you can get better. Some of the illnesses of too fast: adrenal fatigue, forward head posture, which you see probably a lot, and acid reflux. So those are three things that we have totally done to ourselves. It is not, like other countries where there's poverty and there's sickness because of the poverty. These are three things that we've done because we're not doing things mindfully, because we're rushing and trying to get there so fast and choose so fast that we're just messing up our own bodies. And we have complete control in changing it as well. So although that's not a case study, I think it's just interesting in general how I'll have people come in and their digestion gets better immediately. Well, they should change what they eat if they're not eating well. But still, if you have acid reflux and you start using your diaphragm to breathe, you're going to feel better.
Totally. I think that totally hits the point right there. And how often are you doing, because you're doing these breathing intensive classes, how often are you doing those?
I do them. It's kind of interesting. So I'll do them when I'm requested to come do a workshop, which means that I spend a lot of time in airports trying to avoid Cinnabons and food courts, which I'm not great at because I like all kinds of stuff that's bad for me. But so I go and I do them in different places. I also hold them pretty regularly in New York and in Los Angeles. I'll have people come in, make it a mini vacation, come in and take the class. Starting to do them more online as well, and through Skype. and doing a lot of teacher training as well, which is really nice because sometimes I'll have someone who may not be able to afford to see me, but they can afford to see my assistant who is very rigorously trained, and or just read the book, which gives you everything. And it's not the kind of book that spends the first half of the book saying, this is really good, why you bought this book, and then kind of leaves you hanging. It actually is just everything I say in the book. So if you want to come to a class afterwards, that's great. And then again, like I do podcasts and here's the information, send it to everyone. If you want to buy the book afterwards, that's great. And the workshops are fun because it is 3 hours of me talking at this pace, running around like crazy. You sweat, you get to learn a meditation and all kinds of fun stuff.
Nice, nice. Yeah, the book has tons of pictures. I mean, it's easy to follow along with. I mean, it's basically as soon as you start, you're in the thick of it. So
Good.
incredible resource for sure. Now, where can people learn a little bit more about you?
The Breathing Class or drbelisa.com. They both go to the same website. The Breathing Class is just what I started teaching when I started calling the class that I gave, because I'm obviously not very imaginative when it comes to marketing. But it was a breathing class, and you learn how to breathe in the breathing class, and the book's called Breathe. So,
that makes sense. Huh.
yeah, I just couldn't think of a cute name. I would get, the people who worked around me kept saying, like, can't you think of something cute like Soul Cycle or Lululemon? And no, it's just a breathing class. You learn how to breathe, What can I say? So, thebreathingclass.com and drbelisa.com. And everything's on there. I just redid my website. I'm super happy with it. It's got every piece of information you could need. I do a lot of interviews. I do a lot of lecturing. The TED Talk that you spoke about is just 10 minutes of kind of the basics. And there's no secrets. It's all out there. Research, get the information you need. I respond really well to people emailing me as well, or going onto Facebook, the breathing class on Facebook. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And last question, and I always love this question because I think it just tells our listeners so much more about who you are as a person. What inspires you to keep doing what you're doing?
That's fairly easy, is that it just, people get better immediately and they're surprised. And I think that when I was I'm still a psychologist, but in psychology, it takes a while to get to where you want to go. It takes a while to have those aha moments. And there's such pleasure in being able to give someone a skill or a tool when it comes to breathing. And depending on their motivation, it can be life-changing. So if I have someone come in and they are just raring to go, they're sick of being sick, they want change. If they're angry at the system and they're angry at the services they've gotten, it's even better. But if they're motivated, they can change the way they're feeling, both mentally and physically, immediately. Not 6 months, not a year. It can be 48 hours. So to me, to have people come back and say, I feel so much better, and it's the end of class, or it's the end of a session with you, or if it's having finished the book, that to me inspires me. And my mission right now is entirely to be able to empower people with this information, because it's right under your nose and you own it, and you don't have to buy a big gadget of any sort. You just have to relearn how to breathe the way you used to breathe.
Absolutely. That's perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the Health is Wealth show. I had such a great time, and this is going to be an incredibly resourceful podcast for sure. There's already tons of nuggets in there. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we look forward to having you on in the future for sure. And I'm excited to see where everything goes for you.
Great.
All right. Take care.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.